think, yeah, let's just keep it there.
That way it doesn't wiggle.
Yeah.
So it's here. Is it okay here?
Let's take a look. Can you let go of it? See how?
Hey, Joe.
The chain, and it's also inside. I want to reverse that clip. That's okay.
Like this?
Oh, well, let me show you. Let's see.
Better?
Yeah, could you like put it so it like tilts the mic back up a little bit and sort of press it against your chin?
I don't really see the mic. So how about removing it, but I can hear it's working. I can hear it's working. But
Oh.
it's easier.
Oh yeah, that'll be great. Perfect.
Okay. Oh, hey, can you hear me? Checking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Checking mic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
He said he was in the military and now he writes about military.
You want me to keep going?
Okay.
It's all about the levels. It's all about the levels. I can move the mic up if you want.
Okay.
All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Just check it out.
Can we get Katalin to check?
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Great.
Just bump you up a little bit. All right.
Maybe I'll unmute myself for real. Let's see. That is unmuted. Fantastic.
Welcome everybody to the Science, Technology, and Society seminar series. I'm Saul Halfon. I'm the department chair of STS, and we're really excited to have a very interesting panel today on the Criminology Lab. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind people that next week we have Ashley Green-Wade coming from Digital Studies at UVA. Talking about Black girls online. So it should be a really exciting talk, and please put that on your calendars. But today, we have two guests with us, both from the Department of Sociology. They will be speaking in the opposite order from what's listed on the slide. So we'll be starting with Thomas Dearden, who is an associate professor in sociology. Thomas Dearden specializes in research on technology and financial crimes. His peer-reviewed research has been featured in journals such as Deviant Behavior, invitations such as offering research insights to best-selling author David Baldacci, and being featured on NPR. In addition, He has conducted research and consulted for organizations and law enforcement agencies across the globe. This work has led to international professional reports, a patent, and more than a dozen presentations to organizational leadership. He will be speaking today on trends in cyber offending, examining self-admitted cyber offending longitudinally. So we'll start with you, and thanks.
All right, thank you. I'll be able to say as well as sociology, but as of about last week, it's actually a clause center now, and so it's under the college. So we have a website that goes through all our stuff, and I won't pull it up here, but it's under the Peace Center if you're interested. Well, by and large, our overall focus is, originally at least, was to kind of collect data on cybercrime. And so we're going to go over why we needed that here in just a second. More broadly now, we're really looking at a little bit of a wider area, including kind of just the understanding the nature of cyber offending itself. We have several people right now. It rotates pretty frequently, so there's about 5 of us in faculty. We have 2 grad students who work with us, and then we have an undergraduate/graduate intern. It's a 4+1, so we never exactly know whether she's an undergraduate student or graduate student, but she's been doing a lot of data consolidation, which has been a monumental task. So just to go over some of our current projects, and we're going to go into detail on 2 of these. So the first one is our annual cybercrime survey, and this is the one that we kind of launched the lab with. So I will go into detail on this one in a bit, but it's one that we ask questions every year to the general population. There's also been a hate crime survey that's fairly similar to the cybercrime survey, only on hate crimes. It's been going on for actually a lot longer. I think it's about 12 waves now. We have the Elder Scam project, which Dr. Parti will talk about. We have a honeypot project, and this is working actually with a Canadian agency as well, and or Canadian organization. I will have actually a few findings from this, but it's Windows honeypot. And then we actually have an environmental impact as well that is looking at some of the impact of both cybercrime and cyber infrastructure. It turns out that a lot of these things need a lot of power, right? So recently Google has announced that they are partnering with some new nuclear power company to supply future power for their AI, because AI is apparently very energy hungry. And so they're thinking ahead there. So I want to go into a little bit about 2 of these projects, and specifically I will go into the annual cybercrime survey. So in order to kind of introduce this actually kind of helps us kind of orchestrate and tell you where our lab is coming from as well. About 5 years ago, 2019 or so, we started looking at cybercrime from a criminology perspective. And it turns out it's a little bit different than from cybersecurity, which tends to be where we come from, kind of that cybercrime angle. Cybersecurity tends to focus almost exclusively on the victim and target hardening, so they are on kind of the back end of things. We wanted to focus on the offender, right? That makes sense coming from criminology and sociology. Turns out that was a lot harder to do than they make it sound. We have a lot of crime data, but because of a variety of different history elements, that crime data doesn't really cover cybercrime very well. So our 2 major sources, and if you see crime data in the news, one of them is the UCR, and this is the Uniform Crime Reports. This is the one that's conducted, or at least organized by the FBI. And so they get crime statistics from all your local law enforcement agencies, or at least about 95% of them around the country. And that comprises largely what you see in the news about how much crime is going on across the nation. The problem is this is from local crime agencies, and so we don't get a lot of the cybercrime stuff there. There has been there's a new version of the UCR of sorts called NIBRS, and we're hoping there's a little bit more detail, but it still comes from local law enforcement, which is generally not the agencies handling cybercrime. The other one's the NCVS, and this is a National Crime Victimization Survey. This actually asks about 100,000 households a year about crime. So we do capture some cybercrime here, but it is only household crime. So we get some pretty good stuff on things like identity theft, but we missed everything on businesses and other things in that way. In addition, these 2 instruments have been around since at least so the UCR has been around since the 1930s, and the NCVS is a little bit more modern, but they don't like to change them. And this has kind of been a trend of what we're seeing as well, right? So if you think of even cybercrime laws, for some reason you have to bring up war games, like this is the most important thing ever. So you got Matthew Broderick, right, who kind of had this really interesting movie called War Games. It actually scared Congress and Reagan, and they said, hey, is this possible? The answer really was not exactly, but they still kind of made a law, right? So this is your Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which has been amended a few times, but is still very broad. So these combinations of crime issues and definitional issues, and the fact that cybercrime is constantly evolving, right? Some of the newer crimes haven't been around for very long. We wanted to focus on the cybercrime from a kind of we say longitudinal, and I use longitudinal in kind of a marketing sense. This is actually more of a repeated cross-sectional design, so there's my life for the day. And so we're going to talk about this here. So the first time we actually launched this survey, it was really just a question on whether we could do this or not. So in 2019, we said, we want to get some data on cybercrime. Can we just ask people about it? And so this was our first attempt. We launched a survey online. It was done through kind of a sample vendor. At the time, it was SSI, which is now Dynata. And we had a series of questions. We, of course, had the IRB, which was the longest question. And then we had some introductions. Generally, this was about computer use, how often they were using a computer, what they were doing on it, some information on how good they were on computers or what they typically did. Then we had measures of offending, and we took the kind of the national crime victimization approach in the sense that we didn't actually list definitions of crime. Instead, we listed behaviors, and most of these behaviors were illegal. And so we asked about measures of offending. We also did the same thing for victimization, and these tend to line up pretty well with the offending as well. There's also self-protection measures, right? Things like, did you use a firewall? Do you have your credit frozen? Some of the general kind of self-protection strategies that we recommend. The next series of blocks are ones that somewhat rotate. And so we have kind of a stable core, which is those top blocks. And then we have a series of blocks that either rotate or get changed out. So the elder scam block, and I will again leave that to Dr. Parti. We have a bunch of theory questions. So largely, the cybersecurity world and even criminology has been focused on rational choice. And we said there are a lot more theories in criminology than rational choice. And so we wanted to add some other elements there. So we've got an enemy theory, we've got social learning, we've got self-control, general strain, and a few others as kind of time goes on. The last few blocks generally are kind of what's the focus of the time. And this time it was fake news. So just to give you an idea of our waves, this is our waves we currently have. We're preparing for our 2025 wave in spring. Our first wave, we just called this first wave. This was, again, just a test to see if it worked, and it actually worked pretty well. The nice thing about this was it was 2029, and so we're like, hey, let's collect some more data. And then COVID hit, and we said, okay, let's collect some more data right now. So we actually launched a spring wave in April of 2020. Honestly, we jumped the gun on this a little bit. It turns out that most of the effects for COVID didn't happen until a little later. So we see most of our COVID sample in 2020, or in fall 2020. Fall 2020 is a wave where we actually put right next to the election, right before, and we kind of compared to some of the we used kind of the validation against election data. And so that was an exciting adventure, right? Because we know that many of the polls have gotten a little bit less accurate recently. Spring 2021 then was the kind of era of fake news, and so we had a series of our block on fake news. In 2022, we launched an international survey, so one in Hungarian and one in Finland, in Finnish, and so we have kind of a comparative international sample. In 2023, so last year, we updated the survey to add additional crimes, right? This is something that's evolving, so we added on to those offending scales primarily. We included things like cryptocurrency, deepfakes, and AI. And we actually have quite a bit on cryptocurrency in that survey. We had a brief aside in 2022 as well. I put that down there. We wanted to get at businesses, and so we received funding from CCI. And so we have a survey that specifically talked to kind of business leaders, and that was in partnership with a few other institutions. Finally, our most recent was a hacker comparison. Another group that we're partnering with out of Miami had a survey that they were running with verified hackers, verified web defacers, and so we wanted to see how our data was comparing to their hackers. I have a QR code up here, and the reason I went in detail about all of these is because one thing we want to do is release our data publicly. And so we have a little bit of a lag, but right now, fall 2019 up to spring 2021 is online, and the QR code is up to the 2021, which links to all the other ones. So all of our data is available in those 4 waves. We will be posting the international ones in probably early 2025. That is, in fact, one of the things Chloe's working on. It turns out working in 3 different languages is a really exciting adventure, even in coding. And so, so that's taking a few minutes here. It's also exciting because that's, if you know the institutional history, that's when we switched over from Qualtrics to Survey Pro, and every variable was renamed, which is another fun coding file as well. So these are our different surveys. And what I want to do now is actually not go into any detail on them. Again, if you're interested, feel free to grab the data. It has all that stuff. If you have questions, I have files in there, coding files, do files, things like that. But if you have questions, feel free to email me. What I want to do, though, is actually just kind of do a little media soundbite at this point and tell you kind of what are some of the things we've learned over the last 5 years in a very short fashion. So nothing super methodological or really super sophisticated, just kind of things that we could give the media in tweets, right? So overall, in our sample, when we look at the offending, we have about 5 to 15% reporting that they had committed at least one cybercrime. Now, this varies fairly extensively on the types of cybercrime. As you imagine, the more sophisticated hacking is going to be fairly low on that percentage. Things like cyberbullying and exclusions tend to be a little bit higher on those. And that's fairly consistent across our surveys. It's pretty well somewhere between 5 and 15% across all of them. When we looked at businesses, one of the things that, and we've sort of known this, but it was really nice to have some pretty good empirical data, especially in Virginia, it's that insiders were the ones to be concerned about. And what we found is not only did they cost more damage, they actually cost more financial damage, but it took a lot longer for the organizations to become operational again. So the damage, which I'm sure directly correlates to the time it takes to get operational. So one of those elements is, we often think of this outsider and kind of the person across the pond as the most dangerous figure. For organizations, it is the one who's on the inside. It makes sense, they have much more access. So when we looked at our COVID data, we were largely looking at drug marketplaces and what happens in kind of drugs at that point, drug sales. And so what we saw is in the spring 2020 data, we didn't actually see much of a change. And that was because COVID had really only had a society impact for about a month at that point. And it was still taking some people time to adapt. So we saw an increase in fall 2021. I was actually encouraged by this data, at least from a validation standpoint, because we've recently seen some data on dark web marketplaces that really show the same thing. And in fact, one of the issues that they were having is they saw an increase in the early COVID era, but because of the difficulties in shipping, there was a lot of lost shipments. And so it took some time for things like USPS and UPS to adapt in that era. And so that actually kind of stalled some of these drug markets and sales online as well. All right, this one's a little bit longer. I tried to consolidate this, but as an academic, you can only get so small in a sentence here. So generally what we're looking at here is we wanted to see what were some of the profiles of offenders. And the thing was, we have this kind of very generic profile, coming from war games era, that it's some type of sophisticated juvenile who's a little bit reclusive. But what we saw is there was a variety of different types of profiles, and it really depended on the types of crimes and what we were looking at in terms of whether it was demographics or other types of social variables. So one of the ones that I saw interesting was financial achievement orientation. This is in kind of general terms. We have a little bit different terms in criminology for this, but this is kind of the overall idea. It's someone who's really focused on financial achievement. They committed different types of cybercrime. They tended to be scam oriented. Whereas individuals who were low on financial achievement, right, those who were kind of like, I'm kind of checking out of this game. I'm either make enough money in my job or I'm just not interested in that kind of capitalist orientation. They tended to do things like buy illegal drugs or download copyrighted music online. So both of them committed crimes, they were just different. One of the other ones that we thought were interesting was social learning. And there's been kind of a big push to think about how people learn how to commit crimes. And in criminology, most of our social learning theories are from the 60s and from the 50s. And the idea was you learn from your friends. So the question was, do you learn from your friends offline or do you learn from your friends online? And the answer, unsurprisingly, is both. However, the offline seemed to be more valuable. And we've certainly seen this in a lot of the qualitative work on networks of cyber criminals, that they often have dialogue about, say, where they're going to eat, which really indicates that they know each other offline as well. And many of these kind of organized groups online actually have offline origins. And we actually are starting to see some of the data from the Conti leak as well that's showing this. This is one that we're looking at now and actually presenting pretty soon. But when we're looking at the cryptocurrency stuff, we were looking at a pump and dump style cryptocurrency fraud, which is considered a little bit more of a sophisticated, although probably not super sophisticated type of cybercrime. And these were individuals who were either on social media or some type of platform saying, hey, here's the new type of cryptocurrency. And so they were kind of hawking it in that way. And then they would sell off at kind of its height, right? So this is not a new crime. At least the pump and dump style scams, but it is kind of new in the sense that now they're applying it to cryptocurrency. So when we looked at the profile of these individuals, it actually didn't really fit your classic general criminal. We actually saw that they had substantially higher incomes, even higher incomes than the average population, and they had high education. When we looked at the types of theories that explain this behavior, social learning was the big winner here. And the reason I like this is because this actually ties back to Edwin Sutherland, the person who coined the term white-collar crime in 1950s, who said there are these other types of criminals. They are usually wealthy, and they learn by social learning. And so it turns out that we have the same findings from the 1950s, even for something online, which is kind of exciting. I also like Edwin Sutherland because he went to IU, which is my alma mater, so plug there. Lastly, one of the things that we saw on most crimes is they follow a traditional age crime curve. And what that looks like is it looks like a slide. So it's a rapid rise up in offending in your teenage years, usually your late teenage years, and kind of a gradual fallout over the life course. The one thing we saw, though, is for buying drugs online, there was actually a slight rise for those over 65. And so now there was kind of maybe a much more exciting slide where you were kind of flying off the end a little upward. And this actually fits with some of the data on what's selling online. We see a lot of prescriptions as well that are just places you don't have to purchase, say, with a prescription. They are often cheaper. From what we know, sometimes they are the right prescription and sometimes they're not, so there's certainly a risk. For a while there, actually one of the most sold drugs online was Viagra, and so it does kind of fit with some of the data that we're seeing here. Okay. When we looked at our cross-national data, we were really interested in what were those kind of big international differences. So first off, we saw that perpetration and offending and victimization was higher in the US. However, scams and fake news were more widespread in Hungary. We have kind of a paper that delves into details on the social inequalities and why this could be. So if you're interested, we have that paper as well. Lastly, and I kind of pulled this one from our honeypot data, but I thought it was interesting as well. When looking at where people are hacking from, education expenditures for a country increases the success rates that they have. Unemployment and education increases both the volume and success rate. And the Gini index, and I think the one that's most interesting, has a U-shaped curve. So both the highest and lowest countries, and so the Gini index is a measure of inequality. So those who are the most equal and the most unequal have the highest success rates when hacking. So those are kind of some of the things we've learned from our survey data over the last couple of years. And for our next projects and next things we're doing before I turn it over here, we are looking at newer crimes. So we have some of the details here. I have AI deepfakes, further cryptocurrency, and plants. If you're interested in plants, there's actually some questions that we have on our survey that deal with illegal plant sales online. The idea here is that actually doesn't need to go on the darknet because no one really cares if people are selling illegal plants on eBay. So you can actually find illegal plants on eBay. We're looking at trends, and this has been a big sticky point in our data, just trying to get it organized so that we can look over those 5 years. We've got those kind of two different periods, Qualtrics period and post-Qualtrics period, we'll call it. So we're finally getting to the point where we can analyze that. And then we're comparing our data to the hacker surveys of our partners in Miami. Lastly, if you notice our fundings, we have a lot of different funding sources, and it seems to be something we're always chasing. So currently we have an NSF proposal in that hopefully will keep us funded for about a year. We often, when we present this at different conferences, we get international partners who say, we'd love to run this survey where we are. We're also increasing our data availability. Again, I have the QR code there, so feel free. And finally, outreach and student involvement. We keep getting new students because they graduate annoyingly, and so we have to get new ones, and that's kind of what we've been focusing on recently. So for another project, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Parti.
Great, thank you. While we switch computers and transition, I will introduce Katie Parti, who is also in the Department of Sociology and Associate Professor of Sociology. A Fulbright and Max Planck scholar, her scholarship spans across cybercrime, victimization, and offending, with special regard to vulnerable groups such as young people, older individuals, and international students. She published over 60 scholarly articles, reports, and book chapters, and is the editor and author of 5 books. Her passion is connecting research with pedagogical epistemologies and community-focused research. So, thank you. Dr. Parti.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is the mic working? Yeah. Great. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Dearden, for introducing the lab and what we do here. I'm going to talk about this research, which is, well, it's the so-called elder scam research, but if you want to be more sophisticated, it bears the title Decolonizing Practices Using Collaborative Theater to Engage Participants in Knowledge Creation About Online Scams Targeting Older Adults. And thank you very much for the many fund providers, grant providers. We started to work on this project 4 years ago with exclusively Virginia Tech fund providers, but now we have another grant provider, CCI, CyberArts. So thank you for the fundings. Well, thank you, Sal, for the introduction. I am a criminologist, a cybercrime researcher, certified mediator, and I believe in techniques where the community is involved in finding out what is the problem and also finding solutions to the problem. So the notion of restorative, if you will. This background motivated me to create a research project that blends all these approaches: criminology, sociology, and restorative. And I'm working with communities. So in this project, my goal was to understand what makes older scam victims reluctant to talk about their experiences, and if no traditional crime prevention and target hardening methods can work, because most likely, seemingly, this is the case. How can I use and motivate the community to step up and help prevent and mitigate the effects of scam victimization? So what is the problem here? Although scammers are known to target all age groups, con artists disproportionately prey upon older populations. According to the FBI, victims aged 60 and above are represented 22% of all fraud victimization, sustaining more than 30% of total fraud losses in 2021, and this number is increasing. Similar to crime victimization to personal violence, such as domestic violence, intimate partner violence, or sexual abuse, research explains scam underreporting of older victims with feelings of shame, self-blaming practices, isolation, lack of community support, and belief of police incapability and incapacity as causes for low reporting these crimes. And as you might know, software products and technological automation cannot fully prevent scams, since scams manipulate victims to deliberately give out money and personal information. Since scams apply personal manipulations, it's not the police, but more likely trusted individuals close to the victim who play an important and crucial role in flagging suspicious activity and preventing and mitigating the harm. So here are some research gaps. Despite the widespread nature of these crimes, research about scams and target vulnerabilities is limited because most scams remain unreported, especially those involving older adults, so we cannot know about them. Victims tend to grapple with emotions such as frustration, shame, embarrassment, confusion. So many older victims are not ready to report or even talk about these scams. And also, as I mentioned before, traditional prevention and awareness-raising methods are not accessible for all, especially people who were significantly harmed tend not to attend programs such as awareness-raising programs or police presentations. And program evaluation is rare, but interactive programs work better than semantic awareness techniques in situations where emotions are at stake, such as here at online manipulative scams. So our project, we wanted to address the needs of the older community, the research team. I went out to the field and recruited an interdisciplinary research team from sociology, criminology, gerontology, theater, and film. And we created an interactive theater performance devised from transcripts of interviews conducted with older individuals. For this project, particularly 60 years of age and older individuals are so-called old individuals, although it's just a chronological age and it tends to be subjective. So this project runs under the name PROS, Performances to Reduce Online Scams. And if you're interested, I have a couple of flyers here if you want to learn more about the project. Our presentation, our interactive theater project, has a title, This Is Not a Scam. And it was showcased 12 times in 10 Southwest Virginia locations so far in 2023 and 24, including retirement facilities, public libraries, and Virginia Tech, and we reached more than 500 audience members so far. So why is it important to work with participants, research participants? Involving research participants in the creation of data and evaluation processes is not only an ethical imperative, but also enhances the depth and relevance of research findings. We anchored on symbolic interactionism, and by doing so, we aim to demonstrate how participants' lived experiences and meanings shape the data, fostering a more authentic representation of social realities. So what does it mean, symbolic interactionism, in the context of community-based research? Symbolic interactionism can be a powerful lens for interpreting findings, as it allows researchers to focus on how participants in a community create and share meanings about their experiences, values, and challenges. And by interpreting research findings through a symbolic interactionist lens, researchers acknowledge that participants are not just passive subjects, but active creators of the meaning. This aligns well with the participatory nature of community-based research, where community members are co-researchers. Their voices and interpretation of their experiences are central to both the creation and understanding of the data. So Husserl's life world or Lebenswelt, this is phenomenology, this is a sociological concept that explores how people create and interpret the meanings of the social world through interaction with others, and we applied this concept to analyze our data. We also applied the theater of the techniques from the theater of the oppressed. It's a bunch of theater techniques involving the audience in the interactive theater play. That's why I call it interactive. It's developed by Brazilian stage director Augusto Boal in the mid-20th century to convey the message, and we are using these techniques to convey the message that scam victimization is very ubiquitous. It happens to everyone, independent of age. So it's not the victim's fault if they so-called fell for these subtle manipulations. And also we want to send a message that sometimes it takes a village, sometimes not only family members, but also friends, neighbors, and other trusted individuals to prevent and mitigate the effects. And we also wanted to create community where people could talk about their emotions, needs, and actively listen to other people who are willing to share. So the theater of the oppressed notion uses participatory theater techniques to engage participants in exploring and transforming their social realities. And some of the key sociological theories include the Freirean pedagogy that's coming from Paulo Freire. Interestingly, Augusto Boal and Paulo Freire are coming from the same country, Brazil, from the same time, the mid-20th century, and they kind of blended their ideas. So what are the techniques we borrowed from the theater of the oppressed in the play? We borrowed several techniques. For example, using the voices of scam victims, their family members, and caretakers to highlight the many impacts and different viewpoints of victimization. Using storytelling, where performers shared their own experiences. Performers reached out to the audience between skits, encouraging them to share their own experiences in return. Performers broke up the scenes, asking the audience specific questions about scam prevention, feelings attached to victimization, asking for help or reporting to the police, as well as the outcomes. And we used humor in dialogue to ease the seriousness of the incidents and to encourage the audience to introduce themselves to the person next to them, sharing what brought them to see the show. So these techniques were blended through the script in a way that sought to push participants to deconstruct dominant narratives of ageism, victim blaming, according to which victims precipitated to their own victimization, or victims, as we have heard from the interviews, because of their age, were quote-unquote stupid, imbecilic, or out of their mental faculties. And thereby, we aimed to foster critical consciousness and dialogue. So what were the research questions? We had the following research questions. What is the audience level of knowledge about scams? What are the signs, the red flags, the consequences? What's their knowledge level? How is the atmosphere of the show? We wanted to learn about the atmosphere because we constantly seek feedback from the audience to be able to develop the play further. What are some recommendations? And another research question, what are the participants' main takeaways? So kind of checking whether we were successful in conveying the message. We used, as a research design, we used an exploratory sequential mixed methods design. It's basically we blended a quantitative survey technique and also qualitative techniques coming from the field of sociology and ethnography to collect data. We used, as I said, a survey method, and we used observations and a follow-up interview. And in the follow-up interview, we asked feedback and how they used the information they have heard a couple of weeks back at the show. Okay, analysis. I don't want to go into analysis, but this slide. But if you have questions, I would be happy to answer it after the presentation. So the results. So in terms of looking out for others and the knowledge level, we found that the most frequent answers to the question, how would you help older adults to fight scams, were these two. Never give out I would tell the older individuals, never give out personal information and do not buy gift cards. But the other thing, and I was very happy to see that emerging from the surveys and observation sheets, they would listen to the concerns of the victim no matter whether the person chooses to report it, and they have learned it from the show. All these answers though, all these answer options were the least likely selected by retirement home participants. And so retirement home participants were the least likely to identify the signs of scams and the typical consequences of scams. These were the most likely to be identified though by the university audience and the youngest age groups. Let's talk about the atmosphere. So the overall atmosphere was scored excellent on a 5-point Likert scale. Laughter was the most frequent reaction of all audiences. However, positive reactions such as laughs, nods, smiling were the most present at the retirement homes. Contempt or neutral reactions such as lack of facial expression, tiredness, signs of disinterest, even multitasking was most displayed by the university or the youngest audience. Discomfort and concerns such as somber reactions, such as closed body of language, concerned look, collective shock, and sober mood were displayed mostly by the public audience. The most active was the public audience with each other, with the cast members in interactive sessions and also after the show. The least active type of audience group and the most quiet one was again retirement home audience. We have seen many nods, even quiet chatter, but they were basically very cautious to share their experiences. And you can ask what were the possible explanations to that. Many possible explanations. Maybe in the retirement homes, participants had accessibility problems. Maybe at the university audience, maybe the university audience were the most digested about scams. They had the most colloquial knowledge, how it should happen by the book. And in terms of explaining the public audiences, they were the most chatty and the most compassionate. They were the closest in age and in family relationships to the targeted age group, older individuals, and they came to the show together with their older family members. So this is unsurprising that they were the most concerned because we assume that they knew most about how it happens and what are the realistic serious consequences. In terms of the main takeaways, it's not our main takeaways, but the audience members' main takeaways. They learned that scams can happen to anyone and other people are not to take the blame. This is awesome. They learned that shame eliminates dialogue, which hinders communication and learning. So shame is counterproductive. They learned that the role of families and multiple generations is huge in resolving shame and healing. So it encourages us to further involve family members and caretakers, individuals staying close to older people. They learned about the importance of empathetic listeners, and they all said the symbolism of the show helped better understand the nuances of these subtle manipulations. It's no doubt that the style, the interactive components empower the participants. According to the feedback, it created opportunity to break the silence about these sometimes very shameful and emotionally challenging crimes and victimization. They learned how to deconstruct bias and ageism. They learned how to listen to the victim and how it helps, that shame eliminates conversation and learning. And in terms of content, as I said, we have more guessing than certainty. Explaining the results. So we have seen that older and retirement home audience members displayed the most positive and appreciative reactions. Maybe it's the result of their overall lower level of understanding of scams, the signs of scam and consequences, but also they were the most reluctant to participate in the interactive parts. Maybe they had accessibility problems, maybe the speed of presentation was too quick. So we have to work on that. That's all. Thank you for listening. This is the last slide where I included, following Dr. Dearden's style, a QR code. If you want to learn more about the project, this is our website. And I want to shout out a huge acknowledgement to the project members of this interdisciplinary project, Pamela Teester, who is the director of the Center for Gerontology, Susan Reinhardt, who was the playwright and also the director of the play, and Charles Dye, who is an award-winning film scholar. Lastly, this is an acknowledgement slide for the many students coming from VT, and they composed the cast and the crew in both years. And we're working with not just sociology and criminology students, but also students from hard sciences, for example, stats, mathematics, computer science. We all need these expertise. So thank you very much.
Thank you both. It's a lot here for us to think about and talk about. We have folks online and people in the room. I assume this is on. Okay. So I will circulate in the room for questions. If folks online have a question, you can either raise your hand or you can type your question into the chat. Anyone would like to start?
I'll start with a very stupid question. It's just on my mind. I actually made a comment. I actually told that. So my name is Dhritiman, and I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in the Science, Technology, and Society Studies department. So, and in India, the universities where we studied in, actually, not only my colleagues but also professors tacitly supported buying on, downloading online reading materials from websites like LibGen, and I still do that because books are very expensive, and I think that's very rational for me to do that. So my question is am I a criminal or I am complicit in this kind of crimes? But for me, that makes perfect sense. I'm taking French language course and I had to buy a book which is $300. Yeah. I found it on LibGen. I downloaded it. So saved me $300, I guess. So how would you respond to that? My rationality, that which comes from my social and economic background. So thank you.
Yeah.
So I can answer that a little bit. So we use the term offending generally. That way we don't have to go into what's a criminal statute. And that's for a variety of reasons, one of which I think we're probably all violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act at some point of time, if not daily. If you read the statute, it's pretty broad. So we do have questions on illegal downloading as well, and those do tend to have a fairly high percentage depending on the population. I imagine if we tested cross-nationally in different countries, we'd see a wide variance there. In the offending categories, that's where you'd be lumped. In the crime categories, we're not touching it. So, yeah.
And that's a great techniques of neutralization in practice, what you applied. So, of course, you have to buy it. Otherwise, you cannot learn what you're pursuing.
That's a theory
right?
of crime. I'll send you the article. It's pretty
There
good.
is a theory of crime. And for example, we are testing this theory. Are we?
Yeah.
Techniques,
the
techniques
newest
of
survey has it,
neutralization.
yes.
The newest survey has it, yeah.
Oh my God, this is going to be on YouTube, right?
You were just kidding.
Just kidding.
Hypothetically.
Hi, I'm Lee Vinsel. I'm a professor in the STS department. I really loved both of your presentations, and I was thinking about them together. Thomas, I love when I find that my own findings like support something said in the 50s too, so I thought that was great. And I was thinking like if you could speak to the social learning component like back and forth, because Katie, I also thought that like you're also doing social learning, but it's like the opposite, or it's like victim social learning or something, you know? And it seemed to me you were theorizing why the method might work in terms of social learning about crime. So I just wondered if you could kind of like reflect on the relationship there.
Do you want me to start?
Do you want to start?
I think we've both thought social learning was pretty valuable. One of the things that we did in some of our earlier surveys is when we had a lot of the different theories. We have a professional podcast, I will say, and we were asked to go on it, and he said, well, what do you want to talk about? And I said, well, one of the things we can talk about is which theory works the best. And so we pitted them against each other in a model, and it turned out social learning worked the best out of all of them and actually washed out some of the variants of others. So I think since then we've been on a little bit of a social learning kick, and so I think that has definitely shaped how we think about our next projects. Even this is probably 15 years ago when Google Trends was like the thing. I remember looking at whether search terms like how to break into a car actually correlated with crime rates in the area, and they did. So you know, we were thinking about how people learn how to commit crimes. You know, cybercrime can be very technical, and it's not something that you would intuitively know how to do. And so, you know, where do you learn this? It's been certainly a criminological question.
Yeah. And I'm using social learning theory exactly what you said about teaching the target audience, the target population, how to better understand the dynamics of scams and how to help each other and how to form a community. And because of the accessibility problems that we discovered in the show, a bunch of individuals were complaining that, hey, why do you stay at Virginia? Why do you stay to the New River Valley? We want you to come here and display the play because we want to have the experience. But of course, the funding that we got cannot cover everything, especially when we have to recruit the ensemble, the cast members and the crew and my research assistants from time to time, because they tend to graduate, as Dr. Dearden said. So on the long run, it's a wonderful project, but it's not really affordable. On the other hand, I want to develop it further, so it's becoming more accessible for people who cannot leave their homes. And this is a great question, what you ask, how social learning theory can be utilized to leverage online platforms for the older age group, because we know many things about the younger age groups, right? And that AI and VR and AR are how catchy and how much utilized in the younger age group those methods to learn about things in life. But we don't really know about how older individuals could utilize those techniques, even an online platform, a two-dimensional online platform. So it's the music of the future.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Dong Lee, and I'm really happy to hear your many insights in your presentation. And actually, I want to ask about the role of family and the process of social learning you guys mentioned, and also in the process of even like healing the victims. Yeah, because actually, I saw some cases when I was in my country that the victim was many victims were blamed by their family. Yeah. So actually, I wanted to ask them: is there any method or specific case that makes family so integrate into your process or your method of the theater? Yeah, I just want to ask them.
Yeah, great question. So we're already integrating family members, so this is a call for everyone. If you know somebody who would be eager to talk to me, I would be happy to interview them in terms of their primary and secondary victimization about scams. And on secondary victimization, I mean family members who are still part of the victim group, but they are experiencing it secondarily. And so we are finding this, that family members must be part of the solution because they are the lifeline of older individuals. So it's probably not friends, it's probably not their caretakers, but their trusted family members who should jump into the situation and help. Sadly, people's first reaction is shock. The second reaction is, why were you so stupid? Like, you precipitated this crime, and we are seeing it in the data. But the theater play includes different perspectives. Even the same scam scenario is discussed from different perspectives. So there are family members represented on the stage, and they talk about how they experienced their loved one's victimization and what was the impact on their everyday life and their relation with the victim. So the theater play talks to the family members too, and also people. So everyone is invited to these shows, and that's why we invited younger people, because they might have older family members, right? That's why we invited caretakers from the retirement facility, because in that case they would be the first person. But yeah, I agree with you. It's very, very important to sensitize family members.
I might have missed this, but it's also a method question about the older adults in retirement homes. Are they brought in the construction of the performance? Are they like part of the process of making the theatrical play itself?
Great question.
Yeah.
So first of all, we devised the theater play by involving community members. So that was our first step. So first, we collected interviews, and we selected the interesting and exciting and important interview segments that we wanted to include in a play. But to develop how we connect the stories, these experiences, the skits, and what type of activity should be involved. We involved the community. So we organized a series of workshops that was open for everyone. And people from Blacksburg came, also from Virginia Tech. So we utilized the community to build up the interactive components. But when it comes to the actual play, the actual show, there is a scripted scenario for the performers. So between the skits, they break up the scenario, and they ask questions from the audience members. They want to stimulate actively thinking about what went wrong in these situations. What would you do? These are the actual questions that are asked from the audience members. We apply icebreakers in the beginning of the show, and eventually we invite the audience members to share their experiences, which might or might not be similar to what they have just witnessed on the stage. Yeah.
So I have a follow-up question, because I'm wondering if the accessibility issues that you run into retirement communities is because they're not being incorporated in certain ways. Like when you go out into the community, are they there? Like, are they part of that? And then do they need to also be part of the production making process too in order to reach them better? Does that make sense?
So right now, they are not involved in the production process in terms of they didn't have the means and opportunities to come and participate in the preliminary workshops, if that was your question. But we learned so much about the retirement communities. For example, as people are getting older, they need more time to process the information presented to them. And so we have to adjust the play to meet that need for them. But they are present, so they are there and they are interested. They're just not so active in participating.
Hi, my name is Monami Haynes. I'm here at STS faculty as well. Thank you so much for your talk. And I was just thinking, and I guess this might build off of Lee's question about thinking across these two talks and social learning. And I was wondering, just kind of speculating about what it might look like to use this kind of theater community building to work not with victims but perpetrators, you know, and thinking of like, would that also humanize the perpetrators? And I was thinking of Dearden's question too of like, am I a criminal?
Yeah.
And you know, also saying maybe it's not like would it also be this is not their fault either, but a broader structural socioeconomic or whatever, rather than inherent character flaws or something like that, like to focus on that. I was thinking of like symmetrically what that might look like.
Mm-hmm. But that's a relevant question for sure, but unfortunately right now I don't have access to offender groups to involve them. But I know offender groups indirectly, for example the so-called Yahoo boys, those boys who train themselves, so who always train the next generation coming after them, how to engage in romance scam situations and how to reach out successfully to wealthy, quote-unquote, American people. There is, as you said, societal or systematic issues are in the background, and there is a massive compound of neutralization going on. So unemployment is high. You couldn't work in a legal job even if you wanted to. So this is your only chance, according to their narrative. So that's an interesting question. And if you have a hint, if you know some group in the United States or even elsewhere that I can have access to, that would be awesome.
So I'll tack onto that a little bit as well from some of our other work. That you kind of mentioned that this is not really an individual level thing, and it's certainly not. It's hard to measure that. It's been kind of our experience, and I think one of the reasons that we often see some of the individual level theories is because it's much easier to get to. And so we've been working on that, and that's actually one of the things we've been doing with the honeypot. And there's this thing called proxies, which has been the plague of my existence for about 6 months. But I could speak for 6 months, speak another presentation on that. But even getting past the proxies, when we're able to look at the data, we see massive cross-national differences, and largely they're related to kind of traditional sociological variables. From a quantitative perspective. There's also been some really good qualitative work in this area, and that's kind of we really wanted to look at it. Can we see this in a different way? In fact, our current hope for the survey is to reach a tremendous amount of different countries, so we can actually do like HLM models and so forth to get at more than really our individual level theories.
Lois, do we have anyone online? Not yet. Okay.
Hi, I'm Andrew Rosenthal. I'm a second-year master's student in the STS department. And from what I've read about scams, there's kind of a burgeoning group of people with the know-how to commit cybercrimes disrupting other cybercriminals. So I guess maybe vigilantes might be the term. And I'm curious if that group came up in your research at all, if they're a big enough group to be noticeable. You talk about honeypots a little bit.
Yeah.
And if so, could you speak on that a little bit? What type of person usually are they? Is there any noticeable patterns in that kind of behavior?
I think it's a question to you.
Fair enough. So in our survey, the answer is probably no, we don't really see it. In some of our other work, you do see some behavioral patterns. That doesn't necessarily mean we know exactly what those behavioral patterns mean, but there's a lot of different structures and organizational structures involved in cybercrime. So, for example, we see a lot of the basically sale of malware by groups, right, to other groups. And so there's kind of a whole network involved in cybercrime. And whether our data looks at that, it's mostly inadvertently. We see some elements of it, but it's hard to kind of directly say this is what's going on. Again, this is probably more of some of the kind of qualitative scraping of darknet forums that they can speak to that a little better than we can.
Hi. So like this is a theoretical extension of Andrew's question actually. So although I'm in STS, but my work is like in a very heavy sociology kind of thing that I'm doing. So I do something called strategic action field theory that comes from UC Berkeley sociologist Neil Flickstein and Stanford University sociologist Doug McAdam. So they have developed this theory in the context of organizational movement and economic sociology, is that there are these incumbents and challengers. The incumbents who always determine the rules governing the action in the particular field, and the challengers, they comply to the rules and they look for ruptures to challenge the incumbents. So that's what the basically is how strategic action field looks like. And incumbents always have strong state patronage. Then challengers would always look for to get advantage by telling that, hey, we have done this innovation, so we should get your patronage from the state. So in the context of the cyber attacks that I'm emphasizing on right now, is that there are lots of so if you think about the Russia-Ukraine war, it's also a war. It's also a war about cyber attacks. Then there are a bunch of cyber groups from Russia. Then also there are cyber groups from US who are helping Ukrainian soldiers to identify the enemy movements and so on and so forth. So I'm trying to understand within this framework how different cyber attacking groups are competing for advantage in that field, because it's a profession for them, right? So how do they legitimize by participating in different kinds of activities, if my question makes sense?
That might be a question for you.
I cannot answer this question.
I don't think our data could see that.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question of like there are, you know, in some ways hacker groups compete with each other in some contexts. So it's like, I think it's like, how would they kind of demonstrate their capabilities, right? Right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
but I
made
think
a
that they're
football
saying, yeah, I wondered, part of what a question I was going to ask you is like, I think we have all these cool studies of like different hacking groups and, you know, all around the world, right, going right now. And I wonder if like there's ways to connect what you're seeing to like those, like, are there ways to bridge kind of different kinds of empirical studies and how you would connect them?
Yeah, so we do this in a couple of ways. Largely, at least in criminology, that network's pretty small, and so when we go to conferences, usually some of the qualitative stuff we say this is really cool, we like it, we can test this in a different way through kind of a larger data set. And so that definitely informs a lot of our add-on blocks that we change out frequently, so we get those from many different researchers. So if you're interested, let us know. So that tends to be our approach to that sort of validation. It tends to be can we validate this in a different setting? And we focus extensively on that in a variety of different fashions. So we've actually used different survey partners. We've used different methodologies. And it's been, I think, most of my thought process has been involved in some form of validating either our stuff or others in a different way.
Other questions?
So in the past, I feel like my research team, we focused on energy justice and energy vulnerability, did something a little bit similar to the place where we had a speaker from an energy justice organization go to a bunch of places in Philadelphia. We went to 2 retirement homes and lecture on energy vulnerability, but they were very funny, very personable, and they gave out, you know, energy kits with like a tube of like caulk and surge protectors, and showed how to use them, and we tried to engage people. And something we kind of felt while we were doing this was, this is awesome that we're educating people. They are very receptive to this, but Philadelphia as a city has the oldest housing stock on average in the country. There's like structural problems here that they can be as energy efficient and know how to be as energy efficient as possible, but you know, their home's wiring is still from the 40s. There's still problems there. And I'm curious if you ran into something like that, where you can educate people as much to look out for scams, but there is some kind of structural problem that needs to be addressed as well, whether it be, you know, retirement home internet isn't secure, or they're running on Windows XP, which hasn't been, you know, received security updates in like 8 years. If there's something like that that you also notice that should be addressed as well.
In my research, particularly this project, doesn't look at the technical vulnerabilities. We assume that because the scammers operate on high manipulation techniques, human manipulation techniques, even if we equipped our target group with technical protections, it's their decision to break with their technical, with these technical protection measures. And at the end of the day, it's their decision to give out data or finances. But yes, that's that is part of the problem, that the technical vulnerabilities are there.
We're in sociology. It's always a structural problem.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question, and this comes as someone who ran a theater-based humanities project for a number of years, using BOAL and cooperating with the theater department as you are doing. And so I just wanted to ask you about some of the kind of structural impediments to the work that you do, and to see how that's shaped the kinds of questions you're asking, the kind of work you're doing. I'm particularly interested in, I mean, Boal, some of his work is very much about changing, you know, people's identities and mindsets, but it's also very much oriented, at least in his original work, toward mobilizing communities, toward activism.
Yeah.
Right? So not just about kind of individual learning, but really trying to understand how we can bring communities together to identify these structural problems, sort of following on Andrew's question, and then mobilizing the community to act in structural ways. But of course, you know, as you suggested, you're dealing in many cases with populations that have trouble organizing in structural ways, and are particularly vulnerable. So I was just wondering, like, how did you kind of manage the contradictions in using these techniques, but also recognizing the kind of boundaries of, you know, moving away from a purely kind of responsive, interactive system into a scripted system in which you're just getting some feedback along the way and reincorporating feedback, as opposed to really thinking about how to kind of work with communities to build up a whole system of knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, one of the things that we ran into is exactly what you mentioned, which is people come and go, right? And in a university, you know, your actors are students, and then they graduate, and then, you know, you have to bring a whole new group of students in, and so I was just wondering if you could just talk about, you know, some of the kind of practical and kind of managerial aspects of what you're doing. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So actually, I have a slide about the challenges of the research design. But I didn't show it to you because that would make the presentation too long. So because of we are involving the community, we need extended time to complete the research. And it applies the recruitment, participant recruitment, also who is willing to talk to us, right? We are talking about scams, and so interesting thing, our probably most successful way of recruiting participants, interview participants, and also the advertising of the theater play was to go to farmer markets and make in-person connections with potential participants. Because those people who are already victimized, they don't trust, and they don't trust us. So we cannot reach this population just using a trusted individual, which could be a family member, which we know, but obviously we cannot know everyone here, or retirement homes. So that was the first challenge. The second challenge, okay, so multiple data collection tools must be developed. Participants, I already mentioned recruitment issues. The need to train many students and research assistants. It's difficult to specify the quantitative part of the survey in advance especially, I wanted to measure how audience members' attitude changed compared to before the play and after the play, and it was practically impossible because I learned that audience members are don't want to focus on filling out surveys, right? So that's why I decided, okay, just one survey after the fact, because no one administered the survey after the fact when I asked the first survey before the fact. So people just had fun, had interesting conversations with the cast members or the researchers, and they went home. We have to determine which qualitative results to use. Of course, it's rich in qualitative data, but of course, so it's we have to determine which one to make connection with. And of course, developing the stimuli, which is in this case the interactive show, is time-consuming and requires interdisciplinary collaboration. Another thing that came to my mind while you were talking, I wanted to establish a program to educate older individuals who could be information hubs here in the community. So, and through them, the project could live further, information hubs. But I haven't acquired any funding for that yet. I also want to establish some regular communication as an educational tool between multiple age groups. So for example, Virginia Tech students consulting with older individuals here in the community, and by conversing about how they use the internet on an everyday basis and what kind of challenges they face in terms of victimization, in terms of online crime targeting. They will learn from each other. But that is in the air too. So it's, these are interesting questions and suggestions for the future.
Do we have any more questions in the room or online? We haven't heard from anyone online. Okay.
We are fine.
We're fine.
All right, excellent. Okay, well, I'm going to thank you again, both of you, for coming. This was, I think, a really stimulating conversation, and it's really exciting to learn about what you're doing. And so, thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Please remember to come next week.